Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of Woking Borough Council on the 10th of August. This meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room this evening, whilst some officers are attending the meeting in person and some connecting via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. My name is Councilor Rochelle Shepherd-Dubay, and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee consists of 9 elected borough councils who are supported by a variety of professional officers. This is a quasi-judicial committee with formal set procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, then only those speakers who are registered will be able to speak, and they will be invited to address the committee. No one else, including borough councils, town and parish councils, or agents, may ask questions or disrupt the meeting. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application through the consultation process. Please note, there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you have to say rather than how long you speak. But above all, please stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try and reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with what is recommended by the present case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application presented for it using current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alternatives to the applications, nor to consider whether they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, or whether they are alternative uses, easy for me to say today, of the site and more suitable uses of the land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking and that your microphone is unmuted only when you're speaking. Thank you. Apologies, please.
Thanks, Chair. We have apologies submitted from councillors Wayne Smith and Rebecca Margett.
Minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any comments or? Okay, then I'll move that they're accepted. All votes in favor? Thank you. Interest, please. Anybody? No, thank you. Okay, the first application is the Reading football. Any applications be deferred? No, I didn't think there were any, but first application is number 220822, which I'm assuming most of you are here for, the Reading football training ground on Park Lane in Barkham. That's Sophie Morris will be taking that. Sophie?
Sorry, thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Bear with me, sorry. Can you see that at all? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, thanks, Sophie.
Okay, thank you. This is an application for the approval of reserve matters pursuant to outline planning consent 163547 for 140 dwellings, with matters relating to appearance, landscaping, layout and scale being considered. The site is located in the parish of Barkham, and the above slide shows its location in the context of the adjacent Arborfield SDL boundary. The next slide shows the location of the site in the context of its immediate surroundings, which is bound to the east by Park Lane, where the existing access into the site is located. The grounds of Bohunt Secondary School are located beyond the western boundary, and beyond the northeast boundary lies the Haysbrook Meadows Sang. To the south is Byway 18, which is accessed off Hogwood Lane and provides pedestrian access to the school and the location of the forthcoming district centre. The Hogwood Industrial Estate lies to the south of the site beyond the byway. The southern section of the 9 Mile Ride extension, including the Hogwood Spur Road, is situated to the south of the site, and although the above slide shows this whilst under construction, this is now complete and due to open in the near future. The Hogwood Spur and the connecting section to 9 Mile Ride, as annotated by the blue dashed line, is already open. The above slide shows the illustrative master plan that was approved under the outline permission in March last year. The Sang serving development located on the north side of the site, along with access into the site, were approved in full as part of the permission. The reserve matters proposals have been revised and improved through the application process, and the proposed layout is shown above. This follows the general layout of the outline illustrative master plan, with housing located within the southern half of the site with the associated Sang to the north. The Sang will link with the Haysbrook Sang paths beyond the northern boundary and will also include the provision of a pedestrian and cycle path link up through the Sang to Biggs Lane. This requirement was secured through the outline Section 106 agreement. The main access into the site will be from the existing access off Park Lane, with a secondary new access being provided further along Park Lane to the north. As mentioned, these two access points were considered in full at the outline stage. The proposed layout provides a loosely arranged but connected hierarchy of streets, with the main road running through the central part of the housing layout. Dwellings are shown to be oriented to address and provide frontages to the streets and would face out towards the boundaries of the site, where there is an existing hedgerow and tree buffer around the perimeter. In addition to the Sang, the layout provides further integrated areas of public open space, including a community green located in the central part of the housing layout, which will contain a children's play area. This will connect with the Sang via a green corridor of open space. The western side of the site would also accommodate an informal recreation area. The layout will also provide connected footpaths running through and around the site, as well as linking to Byway 18 and Hogwood Lane on the southern side of the site. The proposed layout would provide a density of 27.5 dwellings per hectare, which is considered appropriate for its location, and the sizes of the dwellings accord with national standards. 40% of the units on site will be affordable, equating to 56 dwellings, and will comprise a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bed properties. The locations of these are indicated by the blue and red shaded dwellings above. The proposed private mix is also considered acceptable and will comprise a mix of 2 to 5 bed properties. And whilst it is acknowledged that the site does not provide 1 bed units, it was established at the outline stage that it would not be appropriate for this site to accommodate higher density apartment blocks, as it is considered comparable with a village edge location. The layout would accord with WBC separation distances and will provide good sized gardens across the site for both the affordable and private dwellings, which will meet or exceed the 11 metre depth design guide requirement, with the exception of 7 plots. However, the shortfall in garden depths in all of these instances are considered to be compensated for in their width and overall size, and are therefore considered acceptable on this basis. The parking provision accords with WBC parking standards and is distributed appropriately throughout the site, and in addition, all properties will be provided with an active electric vehicle charging point. It is the applicant's intention for the main roads in the site to be adopted by WBC, and these have been designed to ensure they will be to adoptable standards. As referred to within the accompanying report, concerns have been raised with regard to the proximity of the dwellings with the adjacent industrial estate and the potential for noise and odour impacts upon the development. In accordance with the outline conditions, noise and odour impact assessments have been undertaken. The noise impact assessment addressed impacts associated with Park Lane, the industrial estate and Bohunt School. The results of the assessment identifies those dwellings on the site where mitigation measures would be required to ensure that internal ambient noise level requirements are met. The assessment identified that external ambient noise levels would be achieved across all rear gardens on the site, with the exception of 2 properties located on the western side that will require a 1.8 metre high acoustic fence to ensure external ambient noise levels are met during the school day. The assessment has been reviewed and accepted by WBC Environmental Health, and they therefore raise no objection to the layout on this basis, subject to the proposed mitigation measures being implemented, which will be formally agreed under Outline Condition 44. The outline permission also required the submission of an odour assessment. A dispersion modelling assessment has been undertaken, which assessed the operations associated with 2 microbrewery premises located within the industrial estate. The results of the assessment concludes that the operations of these premises would have a negligible potential impact upon the site, and no mitigation measures would be required as a result. The modelling assessment and conclusions drawn have been accepted by WBC Environmental Health, who consider that the requirements of the outline condition relating to odour have been met. The next slide shows the landscape master plan for the site. As mentioned, the site benefits from a well-established tree and hedge-line boundary, and the proposals will add to that through the provision of a significant amount of additional planting, both within the approved SANG and throughout the housing layout, amounting to over 250 additional trees, which will be detailed and secured through the landscaping conditions submission. The photo on the above slide shows established mature trees which line the adjacent byway and which provide a significant tree buffer between the site and views of the adjacent industrial estate. During the winter months, it is acknowledged that this visual buffer is reduced, and as such, a woodland planting mix is proposed around the perimeter of the site to add additional planting to ensure the presence of an attractive landscape buffer through all seasons. The above slide shows a few of the street scene elevations, and in terms of scale and appearance, the proposal accords with the outline building heights plan, and all dwellings would be a maximum of 2 stories in height. The dwellings across the site would comprise a mixture of detached, semi-detached and small terraces. This mix results in an appropriately spaced development, reflective of its location, and is considered to provide a good mix and variety in terms of design and materials. The proposed designs of the dwellings have been amended since the original submission and now provide further elevational detailing and a palette of materials which is considered compatible with the surrounding area. This includes a mixture of brick, tile hanging and render. Additional detailing has been incorporated onto key elevations in order to add further visual interest. It is considered the overall approach to the design and external finishes would be compatible and complementary with the character and appearance of the surrounding area and would provide a successful and well-designed scheme. In summary, the reserve matters presented here are considered acceptable with the delivery of 140 new dwellings and is therefore being recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed in the report. I would like to draw your attention to a minor change to the informatives just to address a repetition. Informative 10 is not needed as it is covered under number 6. Thank you.
Okay. The first speaker will be Nina Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman and members. My name is Nina Lloyd, Planning Director at Barton Moore now Stantec, and I speak on behalf of the applicant, Vistry Partnerships Thames Valley. Vistry Partnerships are delighted that this Reserve Matters application for 140 new homes is being considered by members this evening, with officer recommendation for approval. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank your officers for their collective inputs and collaborative working to date. The Hybrid Planning Permission was granted on the 31st of March 2021, which has established the principle of development in this location for 140 new homes on the former Reading Football Club training ground. The site benefits from no technical objections from Wokingham officers or statutory conformities. We have worked positively and proactively with you officers, resulting in a high quality policy compliance scheme, which is fully in accordance with the outlined parameter plans, with the following key benefits. 140 high quality homes. These are all houses, no flats across the scheme, reflecting local character. 56 10-year blind affordable houses delivered on site. This is 40% of the development and policy compliant. Delivery of 2.8 hectares of SANG, which has already been approved as part of the hybrid application and will connect to the existing Haysbrook SANG, which is open and available for public use. Off-road walking and cycling routes as an alternative are provided to Park Lane. Community green space with local and native species, and the existing perimeter landscape is retained, which showed in her presentation earlier. It's considered that the site is an extremely sustainable location, and I fully support the officer's recommendation in favour of this application. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. What is it an officers on 4-bedroom houses? The strategic marketing assessment said we should be building 22% of all the homes we build should be 4-bedroom. This again is 35%, some 13% over. We have a real problem in this borough. In fact, we have a housing crisis with regards to small affordable homes. Why is it, do you feel, and it's not funny, okay, right? Now, why do you feel we have to break this rule at nearly every major application we get?
Yes, will the officers please respond?
Thank you. Thank you, John. I mean, I think all I can say in response really is that we considered the dwelling mix against the 2020 housing needs assessment and felt that it sort of fell quite comfortably within the ranges recommended in that table. And on that basis, we felt that the scheme and the proposed mix was acceptable. But also, as mentioned in the report, we also felt that this site was not suitable for housing smaller sort of 1-2 bed flats because of its edge of settlement location. So the provision of all houses across the site was again considered suitable. That consideration also took into account the fact that the Arborfield SDL across other areas within the SDL, sort of closer to where the district centre will be, generally houses more apartment blocks that will provide those smaller units. So across the SDL site as a whole, taking this into account, we felt that the balance here is acceptable.
Thank you. It was asked at the last meeting that a running total be kept on the SDL, and I hope we can see that because this is the second time this has happened. It's not as severe as the past of the last one, but we do not need 4-bedroom homes. We need affordable small houses, and that should be what we should be doing as a borough, I personally believe, but that's my opinion. The other issue I've got, and I'll just get it all out on the table straight away. This was sold very much on the basis it was part of the greater SDL, but I still see there's no highways links. It's crazy. If you want to get to the new district centre that's been promised, you have to drive out of the site, round Park Lane, which is a very small country road, onto the 9 Mile Ride extension, and then back into the development. Why was this not linked? It was sold to us very much at the time that this would be part of the greater SDL, and that's why it should be allowed. but I don't see any highways linked for this at all.
The highways also comment on this, please? Or any other officer?
I'll jump in. So John, you're aware of the previous one, the link, you can't essentially get a link across into the wider SDL because you've got the school and the leisure centre in the way with the pitches. So unless you want to take out it's got a big lane, but the pedestrian footpath, I can't remember the name of it now at this stage, as turn that into a road, it's just not doable. What you have though is links onto the top of the Hogwood Spur and onto the 9 Mile Ride extension. So there is very easy access for pedestrian cyclists to the district centre when it comes forward. There's also access to the south.
In your shopping on your bike, you know, this is where people will be going. They will be going, and it means they've got to go all the way around the development to get to the district centre.
I think, John, we obviously discussed this in detail at the last outline scheme. You physically cannot put a link in, a road link in to the district centre. The reality is a lot of people do drive to the supermarket and get home delivery. So there is options available to you. I'm not saying you get on your bike or you walk with all your shopping, but there's no physical ability to link the two. But it's no different than the sites to the north of the Aberfield district centre. You still are quite a long way away. You still have to drive to get to those same shops. So if you live next to the primary school, it's a long way down. So there's no difference to that. You're actually probably as close to the district centre driving wise and the new Carla site to the south as you would be on a lot of the development site. So I absolutely understand your concerns with it. I absolutely understand the frustrations with how it's not linked by vehicles, but you can get to the district centre and you can drive on the new road when it's open later, hopefully this month, provides an easy link to that.
Okay, I guess that horse is already bolted anyway, but I had to ask the question because I think it's important that if we decide we're going to have what you can call SDL creep, it's got to strategically fit into those SDLs, or it's very difficult to justify it. And highway is important. The school is in the way. You could argue, well, that's a good reason for not doing it, but that by the by. The other question I've got is around S106, not S106 with regards to housing. I see that there's provision made here for affordable homes, but buses have become a really, really important. Both the administration, the current administration, the previous administration, have a gun held to their head with regards to buses. We've been told unless we find another £1 million, we can't have the buses route. Are we reflecting this in the new S106 charges for buses?
Well, the cost for the buses is in consultation with the bus companies. So obviously there is a huge downturn in public transport, although that's started to creep up again, maybe because of the cost of fuel. But the usage of it is starting to increase again to pre-pandemic levels. But essentially, we consult with the bus companies with regards to the service. We consult with regards to the cost of that service and how it provides. So it is reflected in Section 106s generally. There is obviously a level of subsidy that comes with a lot of bus services because, as you say, they're not full. They're not actually making a financial return. But yes, it is reflected.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak about this? David?
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 or 3 points. Firstly, I'd like to support what John said previously about the density of dwelling on this site. This is at 27.5 dwellings per hectare. The SDL, I think, is coming out at 35 to 36 dwellings per hectare. We've got a massive problem on providing development land in the borough, and we should be making the best use of any land that does come forward for development. People have said that we can't make room for flats. Well, I'm not suggesting tower blocks, but small dwelling units have long been an intrinsic part of the rural landscape. And I'm sure there are creative ways of creating smaller units or a better balance of them. And that is something I find a disappointing opportunity lost in this particular case. As a more specific question, I noticed the network of walkways or pathways around the site. Can you confirm that all of those pathways are open to cyclists as well, or is it just a select number that are open to cyclists? And as a final question, are those paths also open to horse riders? Finch Hampstead and parts of Barkham are semi-rural areas, and people do ride horses in those parts of the borough.
If I just comment on your first point regarding density, what I would say is that the Arborfield supplementary planning document does give a broad density range. I think it's up to 35 dwellings per hectare, but it does acknowledge that there are sort of edge of settlement or village edge where lower density is considered more acceptable, with the higher density being closer towards for example, the district centre. So again, as mentioned, this site, because of its location on the edge, this is why the density proposed here is considered acceptable. It sort of takes into account the overall SDL density approach, and we consider that it fits well with that. With regards to your point about pedestrian cycle paths, so the paths that will run around the perimeter of the site, they will be 2 metres wide. They will be open to cyclists. The pedestrian cycle path that we secure through the Section 106, that will be a 3 metre wide path that will be surfaced in a different material to the existing paths within the SANG to provide a cycle path up to Biggs Lane. With regards to horse riding, I'm unsure. Connor might be able to answer whether or not they're permitted to be in the SANGs. I'm not certain that they are.
They're not, no. So Natural England don't like the horses in SANGs, because essentially SANGs are for dogs, and there's a conflict.
David?
Yeah, I'm just going to come back again on this point about density. This may be a village edge environment, although it's increasingly difficult to describe either Barkham or Finch Hampstead as villages in the current rate of development. But I'm quite certain that local people would rather a higher density on the village edge than more fields being given over to housing or development that are currently green fields. And that is maybe something that the planning team should put into consideration for future developments.
Thanks, David. Yeah, that's noted.
Stephen?
Thank you very much, Rochelle. As this is a reserved matters application, there isn't a great deal for us to discuss this evening, other than some of the things we already touched upon, design and siting, and the housing mix, which has been raised by both John and David. I would say, in positive terms, I do like the design of the dwellings. They look of a high quality. I'm very pleased that we have secured 40% affordable homes, and 70% of those are going to be social rent, which is where the need really is very strongly. So that's very positive. And I also like the fact that this is a high quality development and it's tenure blind. You won't be able to tell which are the affordable homes and which are private homes, market homes. So I think overall, this is, I think, as good as we're going to be able to get. I do understand there was a lot of concern at outline stage, but given where we are, I think we've got an acceptable outcome.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sophie, for your presentation. Nina, also for your contribution, and to the officers for answering the questions this evening. When we discussed the outline planning application in March of 2021, we scrutinised it very, very thoroughly indeed. And I am very pleased to see that many of the understandable matters that received scrutiny have been looked at very carefully by officers and by the applicants. For instance, we had concerns, as was stated earlier, about potential noise and odour on the site. I'm pleased that the noise and odour assessments have not only been carried out, but have come back with a very favourable outcome mitigation measures for noise in the case of just a small number of homes, and reassurances with regards to odour. I'm also very pleased to see the very detailed description of matters such as the height and materials that should be used in construction, and agree with Councillor Conway that it's particularly pleasing that the much needed affordable housing will be indistinguishable, from the rest of the housing on this site. I think this reserved matters application has many merits, and in the absence of any further contributions from members, I would like to propose that we support the officer's recommendation to support this application.
Stephen, you seconded? Thank you. Okay, we'll go to a vote. Anybody want to put an alternative? Okay, we're going to the vote. Okay, who? Sorry.
I can't vote in favour of it, to be honest with you. I mean, so most of the people at this committee, there's people here that abstained at the last, when we originally, the application came in, I think it was carried by one vote in the end. I'm in the same position. I'm not changing things.
Are you abstaining or voting against it?
I'm abstaining. Might break habit in a lifetime, I think.
Therefore, it's passed. The next application is application number 221453, 25 Palmerston Road, Early. George, you're the officer. Would you like to start, please?
Yes, I'm just trying to get the presentation. Yeah, Mark.
Seconds, Chair. We'll just get this loaded up.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This application number is 221453 at the site of 25 Palmerston Road in Early. The proposal has been listed by Councillor Croy. Next one. Site sits on a modest plot with an extensive garden depth. The existing property is a 1.5-storey bungalow with a hipped roof, a twin gable protrusion and dormer roof extension to the front elevation, and two larger gables to the rear elevation. Yes, so the proposed development is involves a first floor loft conversion, which will raise the existing dwelling by 1.85 metres. It will also retain the hipped roof architectural style and twin gables to the front elevation. There will also be a single-storey rear extension, which will extend 8.7 metres from the rear of the dwelling, and will involve 2 twin gable features and a valley middle to the rear elevation. Yeah, the officer considers the proposal acceptable for the following reasons. Firstly, the surrounding street scene consists of a wide variety of different architectural forms and design features. So as you can see from the slide, at the top you've got 2-storey semi-detached properties with hipped roofs and gable features with semi-rectangular and rectangular bay windows. Then in the right corner, you've got 2-storey detached properties with either gablet features or large gables. You've also got dwellings which are like the existing, which are basically existing bungalows, exactly the same as what we've got at 25 Palmerston at the moment. And then on the junction between Culver Lane and Palmerston Road, we've got a 2-storey apartment building, and this has got a flat roof and a double gable at both sides, which is the one on the corner. Next one. Yeah, so from the submitted plans, the first floor extension was highlighted in blue previously, which is probably what you can see from the agenda. This just makes it a lot simpler and does it all in one colour and shows it without the shading. Although the appearance of the property will differ to the neighbouring bungalows, when viewed in the wider context of the street scene, the development will not appear out of character. The building's distinctive gables of the ground floor level at the front elevation will be retained, and the hipped roof, which is similar to the existing, will be incorporated into the scheme. So the first floor element has a height of 8 metres and a depth of 7.6 metres, which is consistent with other 2-storey dwellings in the surrounding area. The side flanks are also sited at least 1 metre from the site boundaries. So any bulking and massing onto the neighbouring properties would be limited. And then the single-storey extension will be to the rear of the plot, wouldn't be very visible from the front elevation or the street scene, so would not have an adverse impact on the character of the area. Next one. So in terms of neighbouring amenity, the property enjoys a conventional side-to-side relationship with both of the neighbours. As such, there'll be no harmful loss of light or overshadowing caused. There is also significant separation distances between both the properties and the single-storey rear extension. So the rear extension itself is not considered to be detrimentally overbearing to the neighbouring properties. There are also no concerns of overlooking. There is one window which is located on the side elevation, which will serve the window for the staircase. If it were to be approved, it would be conditioned that this one would be obscurely glazed and limited in opening to mitigate the potential impact of overlooking. So for these reasons, it's considered that there'll be no impacts on the neighbouring properties which would be detrimentally harmful. So just to conclude, the proposed extension would be in keeping with the street scene as a whole and would not adversely impact the amenities of the adjoining occupiers. It is therefore recommended that this application is approved subject to conditions.
Tim Marsh and Peter Doward will be sharing your 3 minutes. And you're on Teams. Would you like to start?
I think it's Tim Marsh speaking. I'm the chair of ASA, the Residents Association for White Gates. We're at the wrong part of the presentation at the moment. No, that's the wrong part. Sorry, we haven't started yet. It's the one which says ASA has reviewed over 400 applications. That's the one we should be looking at. No, these slides are for the following speaker, I'm afraid. Thank you. If I may start now, Chair, I hope you can hear me all right. ASA has reviewed over 400 applications in Whitegate since 2016. Many bungalows have been developed, and no applications to convert a bungalow in the middle of a row of bungalows to a full two-storey house have been received up to now. The reason is self-evident that such a house would be out of keeping and out of character. We move on to the next slide. And we have a visual comparison of bungalow developments. Now, there are two identical style bungalows in Palmerston Road have come up for development. Both have additional bedrooms and a bathroom added upstairs. Number 42 on the left is in keeping with the 1.5 storey style of bungalow, and both are incidentally are 10 metres wide. It's in keeping by adding dormers and Velux windows, by increasing the height by only 0.75 of a metre, and no objections have been received. Number 25 on the right is not in keeping with the 1.5 storey style of bungalow, due to adding a full second storey on top of the existing bungalow, and due to adding a separate roof on top of the second storey, adding 2.5 metres on the scale drawing I was given. 9 objections have been received from residents, Early Town Council, ward councillors and ASA. ASA therefore requests that this application is refused. In addition to the appearance, allocated parking is insufficient for 5-bedroom tenanted property. It is our experience that this will adversely impact neighbours due to overspill parking on the road. Therefore, it doesn't comply with current policies, not in keeping. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. My name is Peter Dorwood, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm a local resident, live next door at number 27, and I'm speaking on behalf of several local residents. We understand that CP3 is the bedrock and key policy regarding planning permission, and that proposals need to meet key criteria and requirements, including that they are of an appropriate scale of activity, mass, layout, built form, height and character to the area, and that they are without detriment to the amenities of adjoining land users and their quality of life, and further that they contribute to a sense of place and integrate with their surroundings, especially existing dwellings. Number 25, which is the white house there, is in the middle of a row of 5 houses, all of the same design or very similar design with the same frontage and same height. And therefore they are a section of the road that has its own unique character. If we look at the plans, the revised plans proposed, here's number 25 in the middle. And if we look at the proposal, this is what it looks like. Just repeat that so that you can see the impact of that and the difference. It is a very significant change. It's much higher than the other roofs. And other properties in that row have been sympathetically increased in size, including our own, to 4 to 5 bedrooms, but have remained in keeping and met planning requirements and maintained the existing height of the houses. In addition, there will be loss of light to our house. This is our dining room and the main window out of it, which will now look onto a solid vertical wall. Similarly, on the other side at number 23, this is their dining room and their main window with lights coming in. Much of that light will now be lost.
Could you please wrap up? You're running out of time right now.
Thank you very much, Chair. So in conclusion, we do not feel that it meets CP3, and we humbly request that it is refused. And these are the signatures of people in the road, or some of the people in the road, who are objecting to it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Andy Croy, would you like to speak next?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to share my screen. I don't know if somebody else has to. 2 seconds. So, can you see my shared screen?
No, now we can.
You should have a photo of the house. Okay, you can, yes. Fantastic. So I just want to talk about CP3 and about how the mass, the scale and the layout, the form and the height of the proposal will detract seriously from what's already in the area. The officer has mentioned that there's a variety of development in the area. The speakers before me have shown that sympathetic development is not the issue. Now, if you scroll out for this Google Maps view, you can actually see that it's in a row of 4 or 5 bungalows over here. And this is the proposal here. And opposite is also bungalows. Now, what didn't come out of the officer's presentation is that this section of the road is bungalow section. There's a house there. So turning what is effectively a bungalow into a house by adding the extra floor and the roof will, as Peter said, detract from the character of the area. Again, if you scroll out again, you can see from this that the other properties do get the sympathetic development behind them. The bungalows opposite are good examples of that. They started off as bungalows. They've got substantial bulking out at the back. Excuse me for not having that's what they look like from the front. They are still in keeping with the road. What is proposed for this building is not in keeping with this part of the road. I was a bit disappointed that the officer mentioned the flats down at the bottom of the road. They are an abomination and they are totally out of the character, not just with the road, not just with the area, but also with the area. They should never have been done. So I would like you to use your judgment as councillors to stand up for the residents in this area and to make a decision which doesn't prevent development, but which encourages the applicant to go back and come up with a sympathetic development, a development which is sympathetic to the character of the road. Thank you very much.
Stephen?
Thank you, Rochelle. I wanted really to, obviously one of the things that we've got to try and assess here is what is the appropriate context? Is it the immediate context of the row of bungalows and bungalows opposite that Andy was just highlighting, or is it the broader context of the road as a whole? And clearly within the road as a whole, there's a variety of building styles. There's been lots of changes, but it is inescapable that in this particular section of the road, we have a row of bungalows. What did strike me as perhaps one of the features of the proposed extension that isn't in keeping is actually the window design on the upper floor at the front. Certainly, looking at the immediate context, what's striking is the number of gables and gabled tops to windows. And if I remember rightly, the photo montage George showed us earlier on, most of the extended build was in that kind of design. There was a predominance of gables all over the place. And that seems to be a kind of consistent feature in the road. There may have been some exceptions, but that seems to be a very strong feature. And it does enable you, in a sense, to retain some of the features of the original and accentuate those. I know both early town council and Andy in his written submission have highlighted design policy R23 in order to make the case that the first floor extension is poorly considered, fails to complement the host dwelling, neither adopting the style of the host dwelling nor being a carefully considered contrast. I have to say at the moment, I have quite a lot of sympathy with that. I don't know whether there's an officer response to this perhaps seemingly rather niche point about gabling of windows, but it does seem to be quite a common feature of the road. It seems to be an architectural characteristic that it would be good to see replicated in any new extension.
Yeah, I just think I need to reiterate my point earlier, that it's just the large variety of different architectural designs in the area. You do have some gable features, but you've also got bay windows, for example, and there are windows which are the same as the one on the proposed design. Also, for the proposed design, all the windows are symmetrical to each other. So it's not like it completely detracts away from what's already going to be there. So it's not completely implicit in poor design. Yeah, should I say that? Yeah.
I understand that's a perfectly fair response, but could we just have another quick look at that photo montage of different styles that you identified in the road? That might help to make, well, it might help me to make the point, but it might help substantiate your point, George. Get to that one. That's the one, I think.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, what struck me is in different forms, admittedly, there's gabling all over the place.
yeah. No.
And there's one exception, but that is, it's absent on the ground floor as well as on the top floor. Whereas even the flats at the end, there's a gabling feature. Now here we're obviously the retained gabling at the ground floor level, but completely different design on the upper floor. And I just wonder whether that is really acceptable in design terms, given the importance of design policy R23.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right in saying, I mean, I would just point out to the one on the bottom right as well. And there's quite a few properties in that surrounding area with that hipped form. Also with the application now, the hipped roof form is already existing. So taking the hip roof form and you're adding another story, essentially, you're keeping the two gable features on the bottom. And I think you can slightly see from the plans that it can look sort of quite misleading at times, especially because of that blue hatch before. But it will still retain that hipped roof. I think it's sort of, it may seem like a flat crown, but it is a hipped roof, so it does have a slope on each side. Yeah, that's it.
I suppose my point is that the exception that you pointed out, George, in the bottom right-hand corner, there is no gabling at all, and that makes it an exception. All of the other examples, there's some gabled form, and this one doesn't have that in the new extension.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that the most unique characteristics of the property, the two gable features on the front and the ground floor level, are being retained. And that was a sort of an essential part of the scheme that these were retained. It's only realistically the top dormer that is going to be removed, and then it's just going to be a hipped roof on the top. I'd also reiterate the point that it's only a 1.87 meter high increase, so it's not going to be as visually prominent as it has been made out.
Okay, Andrew?
Yes, thank you, George. I've got just a number of questions which I'd like to just sort of clarify as very specific points, if I may. Firstly, the increase in the height resulting from the raised roof. I note that Tim Marsh from ASA this evening referred to a figure of 2.5 metre increase in the height. The report, and you a moment ago, referred to a figure of 1.87 metres. I note the plans were amended in June and July to reduce the ridge height, but I'd firstly just want some confirmation on the ridge height that we are being asked to approve. Secondly, some of the drawings and the slides that we've seen tonight could very easily have given a very misleading impression about the nature of, I see you're shaking your head, yes, about the nature of the materials for the on the second floor. Thank you very much for explaining that they were simply there. The shading, the blue shading, was simply there to illustrate the new, building, not to I'm asking for confirmation. It does not in any sense refer to any kind of cladding or such. I think I'm right in saying, if you're able, could you confirm that the intention is that should this be approved, that the materials would match the existing materials. Thirdly, Mr. Dawood, who's number 27, who spoke with us this evening, raised concerns about loss of light, and indeed showed us one photograph, I think, from his dining room window. Can you please just talk us through this, including the potential and the scale for any loss of light to the first floor room that currently, at number 27, that currently has a large window on the first floor, and also the ground floor dining room we saw the photograph of this evening, both of which windows face towards number 25. So I'd like to start off with those three questions, if I may, and then I'm afraid I do have two further questions.
Yeah, that's all right. So just in terms of the confirmation of the ridge height, I'm sorry, it was 1.85 meters, not 1.87. So that's just, so that's what it was amended down to afterwards. What was the second? So contrast to the host. What was the second question?
The materials.
The materials, yes. So the materials used, it states on the application forms that the materials will match. So that's what we've been given, and we will be conditioning that the materials will match. So that's one of the conditions. And then the last one, in terms of loss of light, I think we need to look at it from every conventional house, every two-story house, in terms of its side, its relationship with another house is going to have a loss of light impact to a side window. It's just the nature of a two-story dwelling next to a two-story dwelling. You're always going to have loss of light at a ground floor level or another level, which is why we condition each side window to have obscure glazing. So if you look at a road, every single house is going to have a loss of light impact from a side-to-side relationship. So it's not uncommon or uncharacteristic for that to occur, even at first floor level. I think we've got to remember here as well that you could say the same about every single property in the surrounding street scene. It's got the exact same relationship as that. It would only be detrimental as well if it's a loss of light to the main principal habitable room. And in this case, in number 27's case, they'd have a habitable room or a window to the front of their elevation. So, you know, the impacts. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what George is sort of alluding to is the conventional side-to-side nature of residential development. Whether a two-story dwelling adjoins a bungalow, there will always be, as there is in this street, there will always be some level of overbearing. There will always be some proximity of windows, whether that's at ground floor or first floor. It is a suburban, a mature suburban area, and therefore the kind of spacing, the relationships between dwellings is commensurate with what's being proposed in front of us. Talking about the increase in the ridge height, 1.85 meters, the increase, the resultant dwelling is not itself uncharacteristic in scale, okay, to other two-story houses along the street. If in principle committee decides to resist this increase in height in principle, obviously there is a degree of context that needs to be had to the other dwellings. It might be worth just returning to a couple of the points I think Stephen made regarding the gated features and the kind of character of those properties that do or do not display such features. This type of development always brings into question whether replication or variety is the key, and whether a degree of variety that has an underlying theme, which in this case would be gable features, whether that would be the existing gables on the bungalow or whether you would introduce new gables. That is one of the arguments that this type of development will always bring up. Do you replicate? Do you add variety? And if you do add variety, is that variety harmful in itself? So hopefully that clarifies.
I just wanted to add as well, in terms of the ridge height, it's not uncharacteristic in terms of any other dwelling. Even despite the change in levels, you still find properties with a much larger ridge height and a much larger plot width. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you. Could I just probe the issue of loss of light a little bit further? Does there come a point, at which the loss of light becomes a material planning consideration, and has that actually been tested, in this particular site? I noticed that there is a separation, between the properties number 25 and 27, but we are talking about two fairly large windows, both on the ground floor and on the first floor, that may be impacted. So, is there a point, at which this does become a material consideration?
I don't think in the context in which we have explained. I think in terms of BRE guidance, it's more to do with if it exceeds the building line and what impact this will have on the rear elevation of the property. As we've just explained, it's the side-to-side characteristic of buildings.
There isn't the proposal doesn't sort of breach any of the vertical or horizontal rules of thumb, I should say, that the BRE apply. It would, if we're dealing with new development that's extending significantly to the rear of a property or significantly increasing the height of the property, then the vertical and horizontal rules of thumb are engaged. In this case, it's not something that we would be undertaking independent review into or.
Okay, Stephen, on this point.
Yeah, just sorry to hold things up, but on page 61, we've got two photographs of the flank-to-flank, existing flank-to-flank relationship, which slightly confuses me because they seem to be two different fences. What's the difference between the upper and lower photographs? Does anybody know? Are they taken at different times of year or look at different? Is it the same fence?
I think it.
Oh, I see. Yes, it's my eyes.
Sort of point of view. Yeah.
Yeah. It looked from this angle. One was a boarded fence and one's a lattice work fence, but they're both the same. Okay, I can see that now. Clearly, it's the ground floor window that is the concern for the residents of that number 27, I think, rather than the upper one. And I guess there isn't any danger of overlooking, is there, from the new dwelling if it's going to be obscure glaze?
Yeah, so in terms of that's the obscure glazing condition, so we mitigate any potential impacts of the development. That also serves a staircase, so it's not like you'd be looking straight into or have the perception of overlooking. Just in terms of loss of light to the ground floor window, you could sort of say that impact is already existing, and it also serves, as he mentioned, it serves a kitchen, which is not considered as a habitable room. So yeah.
You actually said dining room, looking kitchen. That is the dining room, not a habitable room?
Just to confirm, it's a dining room. Thank you.
Yeah, I understood. A dining room is a habitable room. The important fact, I suppose, is worth noting is the orientation of the property is at present. That is a north-facing elevation, so it wouldn't necessarily receive any direct direct sunlight, and it wouldn't necessarily be a room, whilst habitable, that you would be spending a considerable amount of your time in. If it is purely a dining room, ordinarily the bungalows, two-storey houses, are principally designed with their front and rear elevations containing all the most usable rooms you would, whether that is kitchens, bedrooms, living rooms, and so on. So the principal elevations are not affected by this proposal.
Yeah, and my final question relates to the copy of the ASA presentation that was circulated to members of this committee before the meeting. And there's a slide in that presentation that's titled Permitted Loft Conversion. And I would just like us to discuss that concern. I can't remember whether it was expressed orally, during the presentation, but it's certainly in the, hard copy of the presentation that we were given, and is therefore a concern of ASA. So their concern, in summary, is that a worry that approving this application would enable permitted loft conversion with all of the resultant consequences. Can you specifically explain under what circumstances loft conversions do require planning approval, and whether a further planning application would be certain in this instance if a future loft conversion was to be sought?
So thank you, Andrew. There's two, I suppose it's worth making the distinction between converting a loft and extending a loft. If the existing roof void of this bungalow was converted internally, that would not require planning permission because it doesn't constitute development. If you start to add Beluxes, for example, it probably still doesn't constitute development until some of the built form protrudes significantly. I think it's sort of 20 centimetres maybe from the roof plane, and then all of a sudden you're into the realms of, does it fall within permitted development under the GDPO? Rear dormers and so on, as we know, are permitted development largely. If we start to increase the roof ridge height, again, then all of a sudden we trigger the need for planning permission. So ultimately, the internal roof void, it is up to the owner occupier of that house how they wish to use it, whether it's for storage or as a study or as a playroom. It doesn't. The council is not concerned or can get involved with the internal use of space. However, if there is physical development and the roof increases in size, it either is permitted development if it doesn't breach any of the guidelines, or it requires planning permission. And because it's a bungalow with quite a limited roof space, the chances are that any extension is going to need permission. But without knowing what that is, hypothetically, there's quite a number of scenarios that could occur.
Thank you.
Now, thanks. I'm much taken with the arguments given by Tim Marsh and Andy Croy, really. I mean, this is a row of bungalows on one side, a row of bungalows on the other side, and for a two-storey house or something to pop up in the middle is completely out of character in the area. And it causes these things cause a lot of upset to residents, as the recent one in Finch Road in Maiden Early has shown. I just think it's completely out of character, and we should be refusing this application.
John?
Thank you, Chair. It's not very often that planning guidelines ride to our help, but in this case, I think it probably does, because the street scene. What is the street scene? How long is the street scene? It's a very long street, isn't it? And you've got flats at one end. Now, just because you've got some undesirable developments which have popped in for one reason or another, do you perpetuate that? Do you change that street scene forever? We wouldn't allow it if it was a conservation area or somewhere like that. I think this changes the street scene significantly. You've only just got to look at it. You just imagine you've got a row of bungalows. There's half a dozen bungalows, whatever it is, I don't know. But you take a bungalow that's next to another bungalow. If it was next to one of the bigger houses, which has already been extended, but every planning application should be determined on its own merit. And this is ugly. Compared with the rest of the street, it is ugly. And as I believe that, ruins the street scene. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable planning reason for refusing it. The other question I would ask is, how much does it increase the space of this house?
Yeah, so in terms of, I'll just again reiterate my point about the character of the area and also the mix of design characteristics. I've just been looking at the like planning history of the road. You can see that number 41, 36, 30 and 48 have all had enlargements to their roofs. You know, what point do we say that's you can't enlarge a roof or have a loft extension? And then coming on to your second point, which was the increase in volume, you could say the same thing almost. There have been multiple extensions in the surrounding street scene which have increased the volume by 40, 50%. I think the fact that it's not overdevelopment, you know, there's not a tight squeeze of the plot. Overdevelopment would suggest that the entire footprint is being used. You've still got 1 meter separation distances on each side. And there have been, as I said, there have been larger extensions. I think as well, it doesn't project the 2-story extension only projects 7.6 meters, which isn't as far as either of the dwellings. So there's no bulking and massing on either side as well. So yeah.
I understand that, and you're talking about the street scene, but if you look at this street scene, and I've driven down the street, there's that row of bungalows. Okay, there may be big flats down the bottom, there may be big developments up the other end, okay, but there's this row, and that street scene is a row of bungalows. If you then put a double-story house in the middle of that row of bungalows, you destroy that street, that part of the street scene. That's what I believe, and I don't think that's unreasonable reason to refuse this application.
Can I ask how many consecutive bungalows there are on this side and how many on the opposite side of the road?
So I don't have the exact figure, but I believe there's 4 on this side, and then we can find out.
And a reasonable definition of the street or the street scene, as far as you can reasonably perceive the nature of the houses. How many houses on each side of the road would that be?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry. So how many?
What is the size of the street? What you call the street scene?
Yeah, so it is a very long road. It's at the north sort of side of Early, and it's a considerable length. I don't know the exact number of properties on there, but there's a large row of properties on either side. So it is. Sorry.
I mean, that was visible. You could see what sort of houses they were. You know, that would be my idea of a street scene.
Thanks, Chris. What I'll do is I'll just walk you down virtually the street just so we can all get a wider understanding of what we're looking at. So I've started relatively near the front of the street. I'll make this quick. There's no more houses down there. So it begins, I'll let you make your own assessment as to numbers until we get nearer the site. So we've obviously got a range of bungalows, a range of altered bungalows being altered. Looks like a traditional 2-story house that does not appear to be part of this development. So it might predate the part of the street. You've got 1930s semis, extended, unaltered bungalows, some chalet now with root loft conversions. You've got 1930s semis with 2-story sides. Most, in fact, of the semis have been altered. You've got, again, chalet bungalows there. Another one there. They all tend to display, as we've described tonight, the pronounced double gable feature. We've got more semis again, two-story sides, semis, bay windows, 1930s. Then we've got a row of two bungalows there with mock Tudor kind of arts and crafts gable features, which have been replicated on the semis as well there. On the other side, we haven't. We've got a mixture of weatherboard and render. That's the application site. So obviously we've got the prevailing, or I should say underlying theme is the gables, but different architectural and different material finishes, windows, UVPC, Crittle. Further down, so we've got in this row, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bungalows. Then we hit what look to be possibly 40s, 50s semis with 1930s beyond. Opposite the application site, we've got the 2 pair of chalet bungalows. Some of them have had their roofs altered. Then we've got more 30 semis extended, and then we go back to a bungalow. So, and then I can keep going down a bit further, actually, just go past this junction. It looks 2-story, predominantly 2-story on the left side. And then we've got some more bungalows down there. Some of them, that looks odd. So that looks like an extended dwelling, not a semi. We've got and then completely different style of bungalow there with no gable features. And then we kind of come to the end and we've got some more modern infill. And then there's that block of flats that was referenced earlier in the meeting. So that's the context of the wider street. So it looks like a row of 5 with 2 opposite, interdispersed with detached, semi-detached, beg your pardon.
Okay, so it's a bit of a jumble. I mean, you could argue then that it's the bungalows which are keeping with the general street scene. And therefore, if you're to lose one of the bungalows, you'd actually be assisting the street scene because you'd be jumbling those up as well. I mean, they're perfectly tucked with bungalows there. Sure, everything's got planning permission, but rather than being out of keeping, surely to have a first floor extension would be in keeping with the general street scene. So that's what I think. Could I ask a question about the parking? It says in paragraph 22, the proposal would result in additional habitable rooms. It doesn't say how many. It just say that the parking is adequate for that. How many additional rooms would there be?
So there would be 5 habitable rooms, which means that there would need 3 parking spaces, which takes into account the council's parking standards. So it would comply with the council's parking standards, and they have shown 3 parking spaces. There's been no highways safety concerns from our highways consultee.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just make one point? I'm not objecting to the guy increasing the size of his house. I just don't believe the plans are very sympathetic. That's my concern.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pick up really on 3 points, and there's this question of light. I think the officers have already agreed that the room that will be affected by light is a habitable room. That's the only definition we use, and I don't think it's up for us to make guesses as to how often that room is actually used. So if it's habitable, it's habitable. If it's not, it's not. And this is a habitable room which will lose light. I think the question of how long is the street scene is one we could spend many hours debating. The borough has got a lot of very long roads, and I don't think we can agree that a street scene is the aggregate of the houses that appear on maybe up to a mile or more of roadside. Therefore, you have to break it into smaller chunks, and I have a lot of sympathy with the view that in this particular section of this road, this development is not in keeping with the current street scene. Like others, I feel that it's not about developing. As Andy Croy pointed out, a number of other developments have taken place down that road that have retained a sympathy with the style of the road, with the gabling, and indeed with the fact that it's not actually a 2-story house, it's a 1.5-story or whatever it may be. So I think a different application may have received a different view, but as this one stands, I would vote against it.
We've already perhaps discussed this enough, but is there any planning guidance as to what is the appropriate context for assessing this, because much of the debate is about, should we look at the road as a whole, or should we just look at this immediate environment of the surrounding bungalows? I mean, is there any planning guidance that might help us to cut this knot we've tied ourselves into?
Thanks, Stephen. There is no cut and fast rules on what the context of the development should be. It is based on purely the magnitude of the particular change. So in this particular case, you may have a defined street with an established building row. The houses are all read as being part of the street. In the case of the proposal, if you alter the style of the house from one style of house to another, the question is, does that fundamentally change the street? If you were a passerby driving down the street in 10 years' time and the development had occurred, would it change your view on what you felt about the street? Would it stand out? Would it jar? Again, the points John made very, very pertinent in terms of, is the design good? That is a conclusion you need to come to. Again, the representations made on the plans with the shading, again, is not necessarily the most accurate to how it would look in real life. It would all be the same material, whatever that material to match would be. Would it be harmful? Would it be prominent? Would it make the other properties in that row appear, sort of contrived, cramped, sort of infringed upon? And they're the questions that you'd need to arrive at. Officers have obviously provided their view.
I wonder whether we could actually see the plan of the house without the shading, so that we can get a better sense. Because just perhaps for future reference, by putting the shading in, I think in a strange way, we create an impression of greater intrusion than may be the case. Right.
I think it's also worth noting, if the drawing, the elevation you're seeing is shaded with the tile of roof, the roof tile rendered in a colour that a roof would be rendered in, the elevations rendered in the material colour that they would naturally be in, and then the weatherboarding on the gable ends as they are, then you'd have probably a much better understanding of the physical presence of that development. That's always one of the problems with plan form. It's not best to envisage what's there, and we don't often get artist impressions or CGI visuals of a street for domestic extensions. If one was produced, it'd be very helpful, but unfortunately not in this case.
Yeah. I suppose that ideally, I would have liked that gable feature to be represented above upper windows, but you could hardly do that above all of them. It would look very crowded indeed. It's quite difficult to know how you could improve on the design and keep the essential features. Okay.
Okay, and the last person now is Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Just to pick up on Stephen's point about the frequency which gables appear on houses in Pumstone Road. I do have some sympathy, with that view. However, we are only able to consider the application that is in front of us. It's not up to us to make recommendations, about changes in design. I think just to quickly recap, and then I'll explain where I'm going with this. The application is for a full 2-story house within a line of 5, and it has been confirmed, again tonight, that it's 5 1.5-story bungalows. There's no disputing the fact that the roofline will be raised and that it will be higher than that of the immediate neighbours. A matter that hasn't really been given as much discussion as I thought it might, is the mass and the bulk of the building. The footprint is much larger, and the mass of the proposed building is much greater. However, it sits on a large plot, and separation is maintained with neighbouring properties. diminishing, in my view, the significance of issues relating to the footprint and the mass. So this leads us to the, to the issue of impact on character of the area. So as has been stated and seen in Brian's presentation, I think it's from Google Images or something, he's shown us, that the property, although the property is within a line of 5 bungalows, and it's actually the, in a sense, the penultimate property. It's not in the middle, okay, of that row of 5. It's one from the end. The character of the area is very diverse, much more so, I believe, than on some of the nearby streets. And Palmerstone Road is a road that I do know very well. I travel down it quite frequently, as I do some of the number of the neighbouring roads. We've seen that there are 1- and 2-storey homes of various ages and of very different styles up and down the whole of Palmerstone Road. So I think it's difficult to sustain the argument that approval would go against WBC Development Strategy CP3, responding well to existing identity and character of the area. I did raise concerns about the loss of light. These were picked up by others. I feel that I have to accept the officer's professional advice on this. Given that there is separation with neighbouring properties and a sloping hip-ended roof is proposed, I think it would be difficult to sustain the argument that the proposed home would not relate well to neighbours. In the comments on the planning portal, there are understandable concerns raised by residents. However, some of these cannot be considered when determining this application, such as speculation about future uses of the property, perhaps as an HMO, or as was raised and discussed this evening, possible future desires for a loft conversion. So we have to put those to one side. Each application must be considered on its own merits. I feel that there are parts of North Earley, an area which, as I say, I can honestly say I do know quite well. There are parts of North Earley where there would be sufficient grounds for this application to be refused. However, for the reasons that I've given, including the very heterogeneous nature of homes and the character of this, the diverse character, of this specific locality, I'm minded to approve the application.
Is there a proposal?
Are you asking for an alternative proposal?
An alternative proposal, or
I can give
any
you an
proposal,
alternative
any
proposal that this is refused on the basis that it doesn't fit in the street scene.
Is there a second? No. Okay, we're going to the vote then. Okay, we'll vote on this then, on John's proposal to refuse. And those against? That falls. All in favor? All vote against? Proposal is passed. The application is approved. Okay, okay. Are there any site visits for the next one?
Yes, Chair, there's one site visit proposed, which will be on Friday, the 9th of September at 10 a.m. is when we normally do them.
Yeah.
So further confirmation will be sent out nearer the time. It's as set out in your update.
Okay, then we will. Therefore, we will close the meeting at this point.